He tied a rock to the dog's neck and pushed him into the freezing lake. But what happened next wasn't death. It was the beginning of something no one in town could explain. Why would a war veteran try to drown his own dog? And why did a 13-year-old boy risk everything to save it? This isn't just a story about cruelty. It's about redemption, legacy, and a second chance that changed an entire community. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have jumped in that water? And don't forget to subscribe for more true inspired stories that stay with you. The wind scraped across the surface of Gracelake, stirring ripples beneath a sky the color of old pewter. In early October, the town, hidden between the frost-bitten hills of northern Wyoming, stood still and silent, as if holding its breath before winter's arrival. Dead leaves swirled like slow dancers across the cracked asphalt of the lakeside pullout, where the cold had already stiffened the earth and hushed the trees. A battered blue pickup rumbled into the clearing, its rust-speckled hood steaming slightly in the chill. The driver's door creaked open, and a man stepped down, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements stiff as if every bone had been asked to wake from a long sleep. Tom Whittaker, 56, carried the worn, silent weight of a man who no longer expected life to change. His once black hair was now a mix of ash and smoke, cropped short beneath a frayed military ball cap. His face was square-jawed and deeply lined, the kind that had forgotten how to smile, or maybe just didn't trust the world enough to try anymore. His gray eyes, hollowed by years of invisible battles, scanned the lake like it owed him something, or had taken something away. In his left hand, he held a frayed nylon leash, and at the other end of it limped a German shepherd. The dog was perhaps 5 or 6 years old, though it moved like it had lived twice that. Its coat, once a noble blend of black and sable, was now mottled with dirt, dried blood, and weeks of neglect. One hind leg dragged slightly, favoring a wound barely healing beneath matted fur. But the dog, whose name we do not yet know, still held itself with the faintest echo of pride. Not fear exactly, just weariness. Tom didn't speak. He didn't pet the dog. He only walked toward the narrow wooden dock that jutted into the glassy water like a finger pointing toward some forgotten past. At the end of the dock, he stopped, looking out. A world ago, he might have brought his son here to fish. That was before the deployment, before the letters stopped, before the silence took root. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a smooth river stone, the size of a small melon, tied crudely with rope. Then he knelt. The dog stood beside him, not resisting, not understanding. Tom looped the rope around the dog's neck with slow, deliberate hands, each knot tight and final. His face didn't change, not sorrowful, not cruel, just distant. Then came the moment, the sound no one should ever hear, the splash of trust being betrayed. The dog hit the water with a dull slap, struggling instantly as the weight yanked it downward. Its claws scrabbled at nothing. Its eyes, those deep amber eyes, locked onto Tom's as it began to sink. And that was when something cracked. Tom staggered back a step, breath caught his throat. The eyes, they weren't angry. They weren't even afraid. They were asking, pleading, why? His hand twitched toward the rope, but stopped. He couldn't move, couldn't help, couldn't stay. So he turned. He walked away, and the water closed in. 200 yards away, behind a thicket of golden aspen and pine, a boy stood frozen. Eli Mercer, 13, slight for his age, but fast and wiry, had a face full of freckles and a mop of chestnut curls that stuck out from beneath a too large hoodie. He'd been skipping stones. He liked the way silence echoed off the lake. It helped quiet the noise in his own head, a kind of noise that never left since his mom left town and his dad stopped writing back. He wasn't supposed to be near the dock. His grandmother, Martha Mercer, had rules. But Eli had never liked rules. He had seen everything. Without thinking, he dropped his stones, kicked off his shoes, and bolted toward the water. His heart hammered so hard it hurt, and he didn't know if it was from the cold or the sight of that dog disappearing beneath the surface. The lake felt like knives. Eli dove, arms cutting through the freezing surface. His breath vanished on contact, and panic screamed through his lungs. He kicked down, eyes wide open against the sting, searching for that sinking blur of fur and leash and rope. There, a flicker of movement, just a shimmer in the dim. He lunged. Fingers met Rolf nylon. The rope bit into his palm as he pulled upward, legs burning, lungs desperate. The weight dragged at him, but adrenaline and sheer desperation gave him strength. They broke the surface with a gasp and a choked bark. Water poured from the dog's mouth. It coughed, and its eyes blinked. Still alive. Barely. Eli pulled and dragged and stumbled to the shore, where gravel bit his knees and mud smeared his arms. The dog collapsed beside him, shivering violently. It didn't bark, didn't move. It simply breathed, slow and ragged. Eli stared at the rope. He wanted to cut it off, throw it away, burn it, scream. But he couldn't do any of that. So instead, he whispered, "You're okay now. You're okay." He didn't notice the pair of old boots crunching through the brush behind him. Martha Mercer wasn't the kind of grandmother who wore aprons or baked cookies. At 73, she stood tall and thin, with silver hair braided down her back and a face that had weathered its share storms. A former military nurse, she'd seen what war did to men, to families, and to animals. And she didn't believe in softness unless it was earned. She spotted Eli and the dog in a single glance and sighed with that weary sound only grandparents could make, somewhere between relief and exasperation. "Lord, child," she said, crouching beside them, "what have you brought home this time?" Elias Liedstremplet. He was drowning. Someone tried to kill him. Martha's expression tightened. She placed a hand on the dog's side, feeling the shudders, the chill. Her eyes scanned the rope, the gash on the leg, the old scars that told newer stories. Her voice dropped low. "This one's seen a war." She lifted her coat and wrapped it around the shepherd. "Come on, let's get him warm. We'll deal with the rest later." Eli stood, soaking and shivering. The dog lifted its head, just enough to watch him. That was all Eli needed. He bent down and whispered again, "I think your name is Shadow." And for the first time, the dog's tail flicked once against the dirt. Just once. But that was enough. The sun rose cautiously the next morning, filtering through the lace curtains of the Mercer farmhouse in narrow stripes of gold. The small kitchen, with its chipped tile floor and creaking cabinets, smelled faintly of brewed chicory and worn wood. Everything in the house felt lived in, warmed by decades of grief and grit. And this morning it felt just a little more alive. Shadow lay curled up on an old quilt by the stove, one ear twitching every few seconds, his ribs gently rising and falling beneath a patchy coat. His breathing was steadier than the night before, but his body still trembled at the smallest sound, the creak of a chair, the clink of a spoon. Eli sat cross-legged beside him, still in yesterday's hoodie and dry now only thanks to the thick flannel blanket his grandmother had thrown over him during the night. His fingers gently traced the ridge of the rope burn around Shadow's neck, the skin beneath raw and angry. He didn't speak. Neither did the dog. But their silence felt full, not empty. Martha, now dressed in her worn denim work shirt and slacks, moved about the kitchen with quiet purpose. She was tall and straight-backed despite her age, her silver braid hanging down between her shoulder blades like a flag no one dared question. Her hands, long-fingered and precise, had stitched wounds on soldiers long before they patched quilts or stirred soup. Her eyes were steel-colored and clear, watching Shadow with the sharpness of someone who had seen too much and didn't intend to miss the signs again. "He's still favoring the hind leg," she murmured, kneeling with more grace than most women half her age. "That limp's not new. It's old and healed badly." Her hand hovered just above the dog's paw. Shadow tensed. She didn't touch him, just nodded. And that rope burn, someone tied him up before. Recently. Might not be the first time. Eli looked up. "Do you think he was like a stray? Or someone's dog?" Martha sat back on her heels. "Someone's," she said with certainty. "A trained one. Look at the way he watches the door. He's not looking for a way out. He's watching for someone coming in. That's instinct. Conditioned. That's military." Eli frowned. "You think he was in the army?" Martha gave a small, grim smile. "Wouldn't be the first time. We used German shepherds for search and rescue back in the Gulf." Smart, obedient, and expendable. The word hit Eli like a stone. Shadow's ears flicked back as if he sensed a shift. His body pressed closer to the old stove, like he could melt into the shadows. Eli reached out again, slower this time, until his fingers brushed soft fur. Shadow didn't flinch. It was progress. The knock at the front door was abrupt, 3 sharp raps. Shadow sprang upright in an instant, barking hoarsely, his body blocking Eli in a protective stance. His eyes were wide, panicked. The rope memory was still too fresh. "Easy," Martha said gently, moving toward the door. "It's just Doc Langley." The man outside was in his late 60s, short and round like a snow-dusted pine, with a perpetual squint and a tobacco-stained mustache. Dr. Ellis Langley, the local vet, was known more for his stories and his medicine, but when it came to patching up farm animals and lost dogs, no one else in Gracelake came close. He wore a quilted brown jacket and carried a medical satchel that looked older than Eli. "Well now," he said, stepping inside and removing his cap. "Heard you pulled a damn miracle out of the lake yesterday." Martha gave a nod toward the stove. "He's in rough shape. Be gentle." Langley crouched with a grunt, extending a hand. "Let's have a look at you, soldier." Shadow growled low, not from threat, but warning. His eyes locked on Langley's mustache. His body went stiff. Eli stepped beside him. "He doesn't like beards." "I don't think." Langley froze, nodding slightly. "Interesting. That kind of reaction's not instinct. That's memory." He kept his movements slow, deliberate. Shadow let him touch the injured leg after a few minutes, though his tail remained low and his body taut. Langley finished his checkup, rising with a weary sigh. Bullet grazed him. Not recent, but not old either. Looks like it was stitched in the field, crude work. "I'd bet my last jar of moonshine this boy's seen combat training. And whoever let him go didn't do it out of kindness." Eli swallowed. He was tied to a rock, in the lake. Langley's face darkened. Then someone wanted him dead and didn't have the guts to finish the job. He turned to Martha. "You'll need antibiotics. I'll bring them by later. Keep him warm. Keep him close." As Langley left, Martha watched Shadow for a long time before speaking. Someone trained him to obey, to serve, then threw him away like trash. Eli whispered, "Why would anyone do that?" Martha didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Eli sat on the porch, legs swinging off the edge, a battered sketchbook on his lap. He wasn't a great artist, but drawing helped him think. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on Eli's boot. The wind had picked up again, rustling the pines like whispers. A truck rumbled past on the gravel road below, and Shadow tensed, ears high. He didn't bark, but Eli noticed his eyes narrow. Something about that truck. Inside, Martha made a phone call to an old contact she hadn't spoken to in years. A woman named Judith Rowe, who now worked for a retired military dog rehab center 2 towns over. Judith was in her late 50s, wiry and fast-talking, known for a sharp tongue and sharp instincts. Martha asked one question. "You ever hear of a shepherd with trauma to the hind leg, PTSD-like symptoms, and signs of covert training?" The line went quiet. Then Judith said, "Not officially, but off the record, yeah. Couple cases in the last year. Most were euthanized." Martha's voice tightened. "This one survived. Then someone's going to want him back." That night, Shadow slept curled up at the foot of Eli's bed. Outside, the moon lit the lake like a sheet of silver. A single howl echoed from across the hills, distant but unnerving. In his sleep, Shadow whimpered. Not like a dog dreaming of rabbits, but like a soldier stuck in a memory he couldn't wake from. And in the morning, there would be footprints near the water's edge. Fresh ones. The mornings in Gracelake carried a strange silence, like the town knew things it wouldn't say out loud. On the 3rd morning since Eli had pulled the battered German shepherd from the lake, the mist lay thick over the water, curling between the trees like smoke from a forgotten fire. The lake's surface was still, but not calm, like something waited just beneath. Tom Whittaker sat alone in his truck, engine off, hands on the steering wheel though the key wasn't in the ignition. He had parked in the same turnout he'd used days ago, facing the dock that jutted out like a finger pointing at his failure. The ropes were gone now. No trace of what he'd done. But memory didn't need evidence. It settled in the marrow. Tom wore the same canvas jacket, stained at the elbows, with a faded patch from the 42nd Infantry barely clinging to the sleeve. His face hadn't changed in years. Deep grooves around the eyes, jaw clenched more often than not. He hadn't shaved. Maybe he didn't see the point anymore. The photo in his lap was folded, frayed at the corners. A young man, maybe 20, smiling in his uniform beside a dog that looked too much like Shadow to be coincidence. His son, Jamie, killed 2 years prior in a stateside training accident. Only it hadn't been the accident that broke him. It had been the war inside his mind that never stopped echoing. Tom had buried him with military honors, a flag folded too tight, a rifle salute too loud. Tom exhaled, a sound close to a sob, but never quite there. He wasn't ready to find the dog again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Back at the Mercer farmhouse, Eli sat on the back porch steps, tossing a rubber ball across the frosty yard. Shadow, now moving more freely, still favored his back leg, but bounded after the ball with more strength than before. His eyes had brightened, but the shadows hadn't left them. Not completely. When Eli whistled, a sharp, two-note pattern like something from an old cartoon, Shadow froze. His ears shot back, body crouched low to the ground, tail tucked. Not in play. In fear. Hey, it's okay. Eli said quickly, dropping to one knee. I didn't mean anything. It was just a whistle. Shadow trembled, pressing against Eli's side like he needed to feel a heartbeat to know the world was real. Martha stepped out the door, arms crossed, apron still tied over her flannel shirt. What did you just do? I whistled. Like a signal. But he acted like someone hit him. Martha's eyes narrowed. That wasn't just a sound to him. That was a command. They both turned at the sound of gravel crunching. An old red motorcycle rattled up the drive, engine coughing like an old smoker. The man who stepped off it wore a leather bomber jacket with patches faded from sun and war, a thick gray beard, and a limp that told its own story. Frank Delaney, 68, had the look of a man who'd retired not because he wanted to, but because someone else said he had to. Broad in the chest, sun-darkened skin, eyes that squinted more from watching than from age. He rarely came into town. Most folks thought he'd left years ago. But Martha had made one call, and here he was. He gave a short nod. You said it was urgent. Martha gestured toward the yard. It's about the dog. Frank looked at Shadow. The dog froze again, just for a second, ears twitching. Recognition. Where'd he come from? Frank asked. Elistum. I pulled him out of the lake. Frank grunted. Poor bastard. He knelt slowly, wincing as his knee hit the earth. He didn't reach for the dog, just whistled a low, rising tone. Shadow's ears perked. His tail wagged once, tentatively. That's a field pattern, Frank said. Northeast sector teams, urban search and rescue. Government issued. This dog's trained, maybe even elite. We used to call them ghosts, because they could find you before you even knew you were lost. He looked up at Martha. You sure no one came asking for him? No one yet, she said, but we found fresh footprints by the lake yesterday. And I called Judith Rowe. She said there'd been disappearances, dogs that washed out or vanished from training. Most turned up dead. This one didn't. Frank rose, dusted off his pants. Then someone's going to want him quiet. That evening, after dinner, Eli sat by the fire in the living room, sketching again, this time Shadow's face. He'd never drawn animals before, but somehow this dog made it easy. Maybe because Shadow never moved too much. Maybe because his eyes didn't blink when they watched you. Outside, the wind howled faintly through the trees. Martha came in carrying a folder. Old papers, brittle with age. She dropped them on the table. These are from your grandfather's days in the Corps. After he passed, I kept his field manuals, ID tags, even letters. Eli flipped through them. In one, a note caught his eye. K9-17B. Use only 3-tone command structure. Never pair with civilian handler unless retrained. He read it aloud. Martha nodded. That's what Frank was getting at. Shadow's not just a dog. He's a tool, a weapon. And whoever left him in that lake, they knew what they were doing. At the edge of town, in a motel that hadn't updated its decor since 1972, a man with a shaved head and black windbreaker stood staring at a map. He was clean-cut, mid-40s, with a soldier's posture and eyes that didn't flinch. Derek Hale, a private contractor with ties to former military units, was paid to clean up uncontrolled assets. His file said the dog had gone off mission, attacked its handler, escaped protocol. Alive or dead wasn't the concern. The concern was silence. He checked the town's directory. Then he found a name. Martha Mercer, retired nurse. She had a grandson. Rural address. Unprotected property. He folded the map, pocketed a tranquilizer pistol, and walked out into the cold. Snow had begun falling just after dusk, quietly at first, like a whisper that only the trees could hear. By midnight, Gracelake was a world transformed. The lake, now half frozen, lay under a pale veil of white, and the pines stood like sentinels wrapped in frost. Wind howled through the hills, sharp and unrelenting, tugging at window panes and bending old fence posts to its will. Inside the Mercer farmhouse, the fire in the hearth burned low. Martha had long since gone to bed, and the silence in the house was broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock and the soft creak of Eli's footsteps as he moved from room to room. Shadow was gone. Eli's heart thudded with a fear he couldn't reason through. He'd fallen asleep on the couch with Shadow curled at his feet, but sometime during the night the dog had vanished. No broken windows, no sign of forced entry. Just a trail of paw prints in the thin layer of snow leading out the back door and into the darkness. He didn't waste time. Slipping on his boots and his coat, he grabbed the flashlight from the hook near the back door and bolted outside. The beam of light shook in his trembling hands as he followed the tracks. They led around the side of the barn, past the old woodpile, and down the slope toward the lake. His breath came out in sharp clouds, every footstep crunching on the frozen ground. He called out softly, voice hoarse with panic. "Shadow! Shadow, where are you?" At the edge of the lake, the wind cut deeper. The trees thinned here, and snow whipped sideways across the open shoreline. That's when he saw it. A dark shape curled near the dock, half covered in snow, unmoving. "Shadow!" Eli ran. The dog didn't lift his head as Eli dropped to his knees beside him. Shadow's body was trembling, not from cold alone, but from something else. His eyes were half closed, and one paw was bleeding again, raw against the ice. He was facing the lake, as if drawn there by memory or guilt, by some instinct deeper than obedience. Eli wrapped both arms around him. "No, no, no, you don't get to leave," he whispered fiercely. "Not like this. You're not going back there. Not ever." Behind him, boots crunched on snow. Tom Whittaker stepped out of the tree lean, his frame hunched against the cold, his breath heavy. The snow clung to his shoulders and cap, and his boots were wet to the ankles. His eyes landed on the boy, the dog, and something inside him cracked like brittle wood. "I didn't expect anyone to come after him," Tom said, voice rough. "I thought if he went, maybe it was his choice." Eli stood slowly, his gloved hands still gripping Shadow's fur. "He didn't choose to be left. You did that." Tom nodded. "I know, and I came to fix it. If that means taking him away, then maybe that's what I need to do." Shadow lifted his head weakly at the sound of Tom's voice, but didn't move. "You don't get to decide that," Eli said. "He doesn't need you to fix anything. But maybe you need him." Tom's jaw tightened. "I'm the reason he ended up like this. You don't understand what I've done." "You left him to drown," Eli said. "I know that much." Tom flinched. "You think I wanted to? You think I woke up that morning and said, 'Today's the day I betray the last thing my son ever cared about'?" Eli's eyes widened. Tom took a breath like swallowing glass. "Jamie, my boy," he trained that dog. Loved him more than anything. After Jamie died, I couldn't even look at Shadow without seeing everything I lost. I couldn't touch him without hearing Jamie's voice. It broke me. He crouched beside them now, knees creaking. And then one morning, I thought maybe I was doing both of us a kindness. "Letting him go. Letting me go." Eli stared at him, voice barely a whisper. But he didn't go. He fought to live. Tom looked at Shadow, then at Eli. His eyes were glassy. "I'm not sure I did." There was a long pause. Then Eli said, "He doesn't need you to forgive him. He needs you to forgive yourself." That broke something in Tom. His face contorted, lips trembling, shoulders shuddering. And then, for the first time in over a decade, Tom Whittaker cried. The kind of tears that didn't make noise but carried the weight of every year he kept them inside. Eli didn't move. He just let the moment exist. Shadow, too, stayed still, his body pressed against the boy, his eyes watching the man who'd once tried to leave him behind. Tom wiped his face roughly. "Help me carry him back." Together, man and boy lifted the injured dog and walked up the slope, the snow falling around them in thick, quiet sheets. A fatherless child, a broken man, a dog who had been both soldier and survivor. None of them spoke as they crossed the frozen night. But something between them shifted, like ice cracking underfoot. Not breaking, just beginning to thaw. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving behind a world glazed in silence and light. The trees sparkled as if dipped in sugar, and rooftops groaned under the weight of the night's burden. The lake was still, the ice beginning to thicken along the edges. Winter, it seemed, had finally arrived in full. Inside the Mercer farmhouse, warmth spread from the wood stove like a slow tide. Shadow lay on an old patchwork rug near the fire, his breathing even, his eyes half-lidded but watchful. The red in his injured paw had faded to dull pink beneath clean gauze, and his coat, still scruffy, had begun to regain its sheen. There was more weight on his bones now, and a different kind of life in the way his ears turned when someone entered the room. Tom Whittaker sat in the armchair opposite him, elbows on knees, hands clasped. He was a man who looked older than he had just a week ago, not from fatigue but from honesty. His posture had softened, the constant clench in his jaw now gone. He no longer avoided Shadow's gaze. He welcomed it. "I trained with one just like him in '03, Tom said quietly. He was smaller, sable coat. Name was Titan, but the look in the eyes, same kind of smart, same kind of steady. Eli, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up from the old field manual he'd borrowed from Martha's cabinet. "Was Titan your partner?" Tom shook his head. "No, he belonged to Jamie. My son. Trained both of them together for post-blast search and rescue." He paused, a shadow flickering through his expression. "Those dogs, they're taught to crawl into rubble, find breath where machines fail. Most handlers say they trust their dogs more than a teammate." "And Shadow?" Eli asked. Tom looked at the dog. He was Jamie's second, after Titan died in a landslide collapse overseas. Jamie said this one was different, quieter, more careful, but relentless. Martha, who stood nearby, drying her hands on a dish towel, said gently, "But Jamie didn't come back." Tom nodded, eyes not leaving Shadow. "Stateside injury. Spinal trauma. They said he'd walk again." They lied. He exhaled slowly. Jamie held on for a year. Then he let go. Shadow was with him in the hospital every damn day. "And after?" Eli asked. "I couldn't take it," Tom admitted. Every step he took was another echo of what Jamie lost. It wasn't Shadow's fault, but I blamed him for surviving. Martha placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. "But now you're here." Tom reached down. Shadow lifted his head and let the man's fingers scratch behind his ear. "I didn't stay," Tom said, "but Shadow did." Later that afternoon, sunlight filtered weakly through the front windows as Martha sat with a notepad at the dining table. She was writing something slowly in long, neat loops. Her expression was calm, but focused. Eli wandered in, Shadow padding softly behind him. "What are you doing?" "I'm planning a gathering," she said. "For the town. Something small. Something needed." Eli raised a brow. "Like a party?" "No," she said, smiling faintly. "A healing session. Something between a meeting and a memorial. Shadow will be there." Eli tilted his head. "Like a therapy dog thing?" "In a way," she replied. "But for people who never signed up for therapy. For veterans, widows, kids like you, people with loss they can't speak of. Shadow's presence will say what words can't." Tom, who had just stepped in from the porch, looked surprised. "You think they'll come? After everything?" Martha didn't look up. "They will, because they've been carrying this too long." 2 days later, on a chilly Friday evening, the lights in the old Gracelake Community Hall flickered on for the first time in months. The building was a squat, timber-framed structure with peeling paint and mismatched chairs, but it had history. Beneath its beams, The town had once celebrated harvests and mourned losses. Tonight would do both. The scent of cedar and strong coffee filled the space. A few dozen people trickled in, some with cautious expressions, others with tired eyes. Old men in faded jackets, a woman holding a folded photo, a teenage girl with scars on her wrists, mostly hidden beneath fingerless gloves. Among them, seated quietly on a blanket in the center of the room, was Shadow. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just lay there, steady and grounded, like an anchor for the grief that walked in through the door. Every few minutes, someone approached him slowly, eyes wary, and touched his head or back or paw. No words exchanged, but the energy shifted. Tom stood off to the side, arms crossed. When a man in a wheeled walker approached him, Tom's shoulders stiffened. But the man, Harvey Dean, former Navy, offered a nod. "I heard what you did for that dog," he said, voice gravelly. "Takes a certain kind of courage to come back from the place where you stopped being proud of yourself." Tom met his eyes. "I'm still getting there." Harvey patted his arm. "So are we." Near the front, Martha stepped up to a low wooden platform. The crowd quieted. "This is not a ceremony," she said. "There are no speeches, no plaques, just space. To breathe, to remember, to forgive." She nodded toward Shadow. "He is not here because he understands our pain. He's here because he carries his own." A beat of silence followed, thick and deep. Then a hand rose. A young mother named Lana Pierce, who had lost her husband to suicide after returning from deployment. Her voice shook. Can I sit beside him for a while?" Eli led her to Shadow, and as she knelt, the dog placed his head in her lap without hesitation. Tears came quietly. No one interrupted, and one by one, others joined. That night, long after the last visitor had gone, Tom stood outside the hall beneath the bare trees. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow. Eli came to stand beside him, hands in his jacket pockets. Shadow trotted ahead, tail raised gently. "You think people will look at you different now?" Eli asked. Tom didn't answer right away. "Then, maybe, but it doesn't matter." He looked at Shadow, who was now sniffing the snow-dusted grass. "I'm not leaving again," Tom said simply. Spring had come early to Gracelake, thawing the last of the winter silence. By March, the snowbanks had surrendered to rain, and green buds curled from the branches like tiny fists unclenching. In town, windows that had remained shuttered all season now stood open, and laughter could once again be heard drifting from porches and shops. The Second Watch program held its meetings every other Sunday in the back room of the Gracelake Community Hall, a warm, timber-lined space that smelled of cedar, strong coffee, and something else that wasn't quite grief anymore. More like something reclaimed. Shadow, now almost fully filled out again, stood at the center of it all. His coat had grown thick and sleek, mostly sable with flecks of silver around the muzzle. There was still a stiffness in his hind leg on rainy days and a thin white scar across his shoulder, but nothing about him suggested weakness. He carried himself like he had a purpose, because he did. Today's meeting had gathered more than a dozen people, veterans young and old, spouses, children, and even two former police officers who hadn't spoken to each other since retirement. Shadow moved between them with the quiet attentiveness of someone who listened with more than just ears. He paused when needed. He pressed his head into trembling hands. And when no one else dared to speak first, his presence spoke enough. At the front of the room stood Tom Whittaker, clipboard in hand, posture firm but open. He wore his usual flannel shirt beneath a dark vest, sleeves rolled up, the scar on his forearm now visible. An old wound from training exercises, long before life had wounded deeper. Beside him sat Eli Mercer, now 15, taller, leaner, his once boyish face marked by growth and determination. His hair was longer, falling into his eyes when he leaned forward to write notes or sketch, which he still did in the same worn book. The boy who had once whispered in the dark for a dog not to die had become something steadier now, a bridge between past and present. Tom's voice cut through the comfortable hush. "You don't have to talk, but you can." Across the room, a hand lifted. May Atwool, a woman in her 60s with a long braid of silver hair, her eyes sharp but kind, spoke. I used to think my husband's silence after Vietnam meant he'd given up on us. But I realize now, he just never found a place quiet enough to speak. She looked at Shadow. I think this place might be quiet enough. Tom nodded. That's why we started this. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with not being alone. Later, while others spoke in pairs or sat quietly with coffee, Eli leaned close to Shadow and whispered, "You're doing good. You know that?" Shadow responded with a slow blink and a warm nudge to Eli's knee. The snowstorm hit a week later, unseasonal, brutal, and fast. By midnight, the town was under 8 inches of snow and rising. The plows hadn't reached the outskirts yet, and the emergency radio channels crackled with storm warnings and the occasional distress call. Eli sat near the window, watching the flakes hammer sideways across the glass. Shadow sat at attention beside him, ears perked, body taut. Something had him alert. A voice came over the town's emergency band. "Be advised, 6-year-old female reported missing from Briar Hollow Trail area. Last seen with red coat. Name, Lily Heron. Search suspended due to conditions, resuming daylight." Shadow growled, low and urgent. Tom, standing behind him, frowned. He knows something. Eli was already on his feet. She's still out there. An hour later, Tom's old truck rumbled up the road north of Briar Hollow. Snow gusted hard against the windshield. In the passenger seat, Shadow stood with his front paws braced against the dash, nose pressed to the glass, tail stiff. They parked at the trailhead, headlights cutting into the swirling white. Eli tightened the scarf around his neck, flashlight in hand. Tom grabbed the emergency kit and a flare. "Are you sure we should?" Tom began. Shadow bolted from the truck before he could finish, nose to the wind, barking once, sharp and deliberate. Tom nodded. "We follow him." Through the storm they went, Shadow carving a trail with uncanny instinct. Over icy rocks, across buried branches, deeper into the woods where even the rangers hadn't gone. Then, at the base of a fallen log, he stopped, barked twice, began digging. There, nestled beneath the trunk, lay a small form wrapped in red. Tom pulled her free, checking for breath. "She's alive." "Barely." Eli threw off his coat, wrapped her inside. "We need to get back. Now." Shadow stayed close, nudging the girl's cheek gently, whining low until her eyelids fluttered. They made it to the truck just as the first rescue team arrived. The medics took over, and the little girl was rushed away with heat packs and oxygen. But before the doors closed, she reached out with one small, frostbitten hand and touched Shadow's head. "Doggy," she whispered, and smiled. 2 days later, the town gathered once again at the community hall. Not for grief, not for silence, but for celebration. Lily Heron was safe, recovering, and everyone knew who had found her. Shadow stood beneath a handmade banner. "Thank you, hero." Children gathered near him, each allowed one gentle pat. Adults stood at the edges, coffee in hand, speaking softly of miracles. Tom watched it all from the back of the room. He didn't say much anymore. He didn't need to. Eli knelt beside Shadow, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "You stayed," he whispered. "You always stay." Shadow leaned into him, and outside, beyond the windows, the snow had finally stopped falling. Sometimes, the ones who've been through the worst are the ones who teach us how to stay. Shadow wasn't just a dog left behind. He was a reminder that healing often begins when we choose to stand beside those who are hurting, even when we don't have the right words. In our own lives, we all carry things, loss, guilt, fear, that we don't always speak about. But like Tom, Eli, and Shadow showed us, redemption can start with a single act of courage, a second chance, or simply choosing not to walk away. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true inspired stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And if you believe that love, loyalty, and healing are gifts from above, comment amen below. May God bless you, and may we all have the strength to stay when it matters most.